happy to have joining me this morning from Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, Policy Director Kyle Kanan. Good morning, Kyle. How are you?
Morning, Meg. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for joining me on a Monday morning. Sometimes it's a little bit more challenging after the weekend to get fired up for Monday, but here we are, right?
The new week, more government bureaucracy to fight this week. So.
Yes, indeed. Put on your cape and get ready. So I presume you spend a bit of time over at the Capitol, correct?
Yeah. I usually go once or twice a week.
And I know that you testified, you have testified at various hearings and in support of, and I think this is, maybe it's a theme now that we are experiencing in the golden age of America and Trump's golden age of America about government transparency. I was just talking about it in the last segment before we went to a break, and how critical it is that we, as American taxpayers, as the citizens of this country, that we be, that our government be transparent about its actions. And I know you have, your organization, Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, has released a new report on government transparency through public records or open records.
Yeah, so last week was Sunshine Week, which is kind of a national celebration of, week to raise awareness about the importance of having transparent government and access to records. So we put this report out last week for that reason, and I think there's a number of reasons that conservatives should be really value transparency. So when you think about it, it helps keep bureaucrats in checks and limits government overreach. For those that are really, concerned about how their tax dollars are spent, you can use public records to see how they're being spent and expose waste, fraud, and abuse. And for parents, if you want to know what's going on in your child's classroom, having access to those records is incredibly important. So that's why we have one of the oldest public records laws in the nation here in Wisconsin. It's pretty robust, but it's not infallible, and there's a lot of reforms that can be done to improve it and make it easier for the public to access what their government is doing.
Well, so let's talk about what you believe should be some of the reforms that the legislature implements.
Yeah, so we set out like 5 to 6 reforms in here, and there's a couple other ones too that we could talk about. But I think the main one, right, is setting a clear deadline for responses to public records. So let's say you're a citizen and you file a records request against your, asking for some records from your school district. There's really no set statutory timeline that the school district has to get back to you. The statute basically says as soon as practicable without delay, and that's kind of open for interpretation, right? So, we've seen a lot of government entities kind of slow walk the process. We had to file a lawsuit against the Madison School District back in 2023. They took almost a year to fulfill a pretty basic request, and only after we sued them did they actually fulfill the request. So the reform we're proposing here is pretty simple. You got 14 days to respond to a request. So when I send you an email saying I want these records, you have to acknowledge it within 14 days and then have 60 days to fulfill it. That's 2 months. That should give enough time for governments to fulfill a records request. And I think what's important with this too is governments can hold back records when they need to be held accountable the most. So let's give the example of maybe this, DPI race. If you had requested records from DPI 3 months ago that might be relevant in the upcoming election, right? If they can sit on those records until after the election day, and that's just not right. So we need to have clear deadlines and give citizens the opportunity to get records in a timely manner.
So here's the problem. We've got a Democrat governor. So, we have this nice, I don't really see how those on the left could argue against what is being proposed or being asked, but it often favors the lack of transparency you see on the left. So I don't know. I don't have a lot of confidence. I don't know if you do in Governor Evers actually signing this into law if there are changes, significant changes made?
Maybe on some of these ideas that I put forth here. I mean, there have been instances. On the next idea, I'll kind of get into. The governor actually proposed something similar in his last state budget, and that's um, eliminating or raising the location fee threshold. So, just to get into the weeds a little bit here. So, when you request documents, let's say you request them from your school district, if the cost of looking for those documents exceeds $50, that school district can charge you for the cost of doing that. The fee threshold that's been in place, that $50, has been $50 since 1981. So the governor did propose in one of his most recent budgets raising that threshold to 100. We say you should raise it, to match inflation and keep that going up. That'd be about $170 a day, or just eliminate it altogether. And I'll just give you an example of how this location fee is used to prevent people from requesting records. So we did a project a few years back and requested curriculum materials from school districts around the state, the 9 largest ones. And we got quotes back from all those districts that ranged widely in cost. So you take the Racine Unified School District, a pretty large district. They said you can have the records for nothing. You get to Madison, and they charged us $5,250. We didn't follow through with that because that's a huge sum of money. But that just proves that these location fees can be erected as a barrier without any accountability. And people, when you see a number like that, unless you can hire an attorney, you're probably not going to follow through with it. So we think we should get rid of these, or at least at a minimum raise them to keep pace with inflation. And I think this is something that could have bipartisan support.
Well, and that's encouraging. I don't, we were talking off air about how inaccessible Governor Evers has been, and I don't know if you would, I don't know if either one of us can figure out what his strategy is, but maybe that is his strategy, is that he's inaccessible, or he's unwilling to work in any way with the Republican legislature, and so therefore he's not going to meet with any of them.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I will say his track record on transparency has been very spotty. There are a number of proactive measures that the Walker administration took, posting records requests online and, having guidelines for how agencies, timelines for how quickly agencies had to respond to requests. One of the first things Governor Evers did when he was elected was get rid of a lot of those pro-transparency measures. But I think if some of these bills were to land on his desk, it'd be really hard to not sign them, because do you really want to be the guy who vetoes a bill that is pro-transparency and pro-taxpayer? And maybe he would, but I think that's a politically suicidal thing to do. So,
well, although he has been known to do some dumb things, so let's not.
That is true.
Yeah, let's not sell him too short. So let's talk about. I know that there are at least a few other bills that Will is interested in the legislature. I know one of which is AB 1, making I would just say making high academic standards the norm in Wisconsin. I mean, our state used to have a great reputation in education, and I mean, what has happened?
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. So, as I talked about last time I was on, DPI has taken a number of unilateral actions to really dial back the accountability that we have in the system. They've messed with our state report cards. They've messed with the cut scores on our state exams, and they've changed the terminology to kind of whitewash how kids are actually doing. And I think that's wrong, right? And we need to have high standards. An accountable education system is one that's performing for kids the best. So AB1 would restore all of these metrics back to what they were prior to DPI's actions. It passed the state Senate last week and is heading to the governor's desk. The governor's signaled that he signaled that he was upset with the actions by DPI, but at the same time, he's also signaled that he's likely to veto these because the education bureaucrats know better than than the legislature in this. So that's really disappointing to hear, and hopefully he changes his mind. People can call the governor's office and pressure him to sign AB1 because it is important for the future of education in the state.
Well, and boy, I used to have his number. Oh, God forbid I would have his number memorized, but I'll pull it up in a second here. So I know there's another bill that your team is also instrumental in the legislature that just recently.
Yeah. There's actually going back to the transparency line. There was a bill introduced this week I should say last week, by Senator Wongard and Representative Todd Novak from southwestern Wisconsin. And this has been a priority of Will's this session and last session. The bill passed the Senate unanimously last year, but didn't get a vote in the Assembly. So we're hoping we can get it across. But this goes back to this transparency issue. So in the past, if you submitted a records request for government records, let's say the agency you submitted to took 6-9 months, you could go file a lawsuit. Often what happens once you file a lawsuit, the government agency will turn over those records pretty quickly. It used to be, prior to a Supreme Court decision a few years ago, that if the lawsuit is what compelled the government agency to turn over the records, you could get your attorney's fees covered. And that was an important check on governments intentionally delaying fulfilling records requests. So unfortunately, this court case made it so they can't do that unless the case is decided on the merits. Usually it's settled, and then you get your attorney's fees because hiring an attorney to file these lawsuits is time intensive. It costs a lot of money. So this would restore the law back to what it was before. And this just got introduced last week, and it's going through a co-sponsorship period. Lawmakers have the opportunity to sign on to the bill, and I'm hopeful that we can get that across the finish line in both houses. It passed unanimously, so bipartisan, like I said. We just got to get through the state assembly this year.
Sorry, my mic was not functioning. I was just panicked there for a second. So, do you have confidence that, because I guess my impression of Tony Evers' actions are that he is unwilling to give Republicans credit for anything. So why would he sign any bill that, I guess other than this, the bipartisan one that you just talked about, but any other bill that is popular with citizens here in Wisconsin, which demonstrates through polling that this is something that they are supportive of, that he will continue to. What do you hypothesize the strategy is with Evers? Is just to keep the Republicans at bay long enough until they can take over the legislature?
I think that's exactly what's happening here, and I think there's a hope that they'll be able to take over the legislature after this next cycle, or at least one of the houses, and that would lay the groundwork for basically turning Wisconsin into Minnesota, which we obviously don't want. So I can't really say. He's vetoed more bills than any governor in history, if my memory recalls here. And there's not a lot of trust between the legislative and executive branch right now. If I were in his shoes, I would be working to restore that trust, because at the end of the day, if he wants to run for re-election again, and I don't know if he does or not, but you have to, find popular ways or popular wins that the public agrees with, and this is one of those easy things. Transparency and government efficiency is something that the public overwhelmingly supports. They want a government that works for them, not one that is inefficient and just littered with bureaucracy.
Well, okay, so I've got Governor Evers' number, and it's pretty straightforward. AB1, Assembly Bill 1, which would reverse actions over recent years by DPI, Jill Underly, in lowering the standards. Wisconsin's education governor, isn't that what he was billed as? Why wouldn't he support something like that? So this is an easy one to call, 608-266-1212, and ask Governor Evers to sign. What's the Senate? Is it Senate Bill 1, 2?
I think it's Senate Bill 28, but it's
Okay.
AB 1. What will be is what's
AB1.
forward to his desk.
Okay.
So
AB1. So yes, and I mean this is just, I don't know. It seems to me to be common sense, Kyle, to want to raise our standards, and I don't even know if I'd say raise our standards, just return them to the levels that we once had before Jill Underly got a hold of them.
Yeah, 100%. There's really no reason to veto this, and he's messaged this year as the year of the kid. If he really wants to follow through on that promise of making it the year of the kid, this is the first thing you should do, and hold our kids to a high standard, because we live in a global economy, a global world where they have to compete, and unfortunately the U.S. and our states keep falling behind globally when it comes to education. We really need to get back to basics and get people on the right trajectory. And it just hasn't been happening in recent years, especially after COVID.
It's embarrassing, frankly. And I mean, I just think how shameful it is that there's even a chance that Governor Evers is just full of double speak. And although he was critical of the state superintendent Jill Underly's decision to lower the standards, and expressed frustration about it, that he wouldn't sign this into law. So I guess in your experience, is there like a day designated for bill signings with the governor, or is it just arbitrary when he'll sign a bill when he wants to or doesn't?
Yeah, it depends. Typically, if they want to make a big deal out of signing a bill, they'll usually do it in a very public manner. Otherwise, they kind of group all the smaller bills together and have a day where they do a bunch. But if he vetoes it, I expect that to be a Friday afternoon special where they'll issue a veto message right before a weekend to try and bury that. So that's typically what happens with some of these more controversial vetoes. And like I said, I hope he changes his mind, because if he says he doesn't trust the legislature to make these decisions, but it's important to know that he's the one who put a lot of these higher standards in place. So as you said, it's really talking out of both sides of your mouth. They're really following what you did when you were the DPI superintendent. So there's really no reason for him to veto it.
Well, and I have to believe that he's not going to do anything before the election, because this would be, yet another example of how he's not supportive of the current DPI superintendent.
Yeah, I think if he can avoid doing it, he will. I'm not exactly sure on the timelines of whether or not he has to sign it before April 1st, because I believe it was forwarded to him last week. So we'll have to wait and see what he does.
Indeed. Well, keep up the great work, Kyle Kanan from Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty. And for our listeners' benefit, they can go out to your website and read more about these issues.
Yeah, it's will-law.org. And in addition to our report that we put out last week on transparency, we have a nice handy guide it's called the Citizen's Guide to Open Government. So if you want to learn how to file records requests and how the system works, I recommend you searching for that. It'll even give you templates on how to file records requests. So.
Well, thanks again. I appreciate you joining me this morning. Hope you have a great day and a great week, Kyle.